Welcome to another episode of the Core Podcast. Chris Hodson is joining us this time, and what a great episode it was. He did a nice little plug about his book, and if you haven't read it, please do. But you're lucky to get some fantastic tips for him today. He covers so much on securing environments, building security products, cloud security engineering, talking about his childhood. There was so much that we got into this episode. It's such a good one. So I'm delighted, even though he said it was a therapy session, for you to join us for another episode of the Core Podcast. Chris, welcome to the Core Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. For anyone that doesn't know you or hasn't had the wonderful chance of seeing you speak, or I was very lucky to meet you at CySec, could you give everyone a little bit of history about you? And I do like to ask, what does Chris's childhood look like, and how did you end up in cybersecurity? Because for everyone I've spoken to, it doesn't seem to be a natural thing, or you're at school and went, I want to go into that. So you don't have to tell me too much, but like, what was school like, and how did you, Chris, end up in where we are sat today?
God, wow, it feels like a therapy session. How did I get into so firstly, hello everyone. I got into cybersecurity through kind of a very technical route. I think like some people get in through kind of like business operations and move into cyber, but ever since I was very young, I was very kind of curious and interested in how things worked. From a technology and a science perspective. I think first computer we had in the house was like and I'm showing my age here, definitely, like an Amstrad CPC 464. Games took like 45 minutes to load. They were on cassette. Just really interested in how you went from this like tape to actually having, visuals and graphics, and could play a game, and how things work, but also very curious in, maybe slightly malevolent here, but like how things could be broken, right? Do you know what I mean? And like how you would actually construct things. So I think that gives you kind of quite a good kind of grounding. I think also, I think honestly, just like worrying a lot about how things fail. Like I think possibly I'm slightly glass half empty. So I'm not saying that all cybersecurity people are, but certainly strategizing and thinking about different kind of variables and scenarios has helped. I definitely didn't know I wanted to get into security. I mean, I'm 42, so cybersecurity is a discipline. When I was at school, you were lucky if your school really had like more than 5 computers, and certainly protecting them and like digital safety wasn't top of mind. So I thought initially that I wanted to go into journalism or writing. I think that's it certainly helped me with, endeavors with kind of documentation and writing and publishing and whatnot. But so did that, went to college, kind of started my A-levels initially. English was obviously one of them. Really decided that wasn't for me, went down a more vocational route, kind of got into sort of IT support and kind of systems engineering, software development. And then from there kind of realized, like much like the childhood, that, security was something that was interesting to me. Went down the Microsoft MCSE route, for anyone who's familiar with that. So again, systems engineering, and reached kind of this pivot point for, do you go into databases and messaging and whatnot, or, double down on the security side of things. So did that. I suppose the rest is history. Did a lot of work as a consultant, like financial services and retail, and then moved into the dark side of vendor world about 10 years ago now. So largely working for kind of startup growth stage companies. He was lucky enough to work at Zscaler, Tanium, Contentful, and now I'm over at Cyberhaven. So that's like the worst overview, and I completely didn't think about that, but that's like how I got into security, I suppose.
I think the one thing that was a hop, skip and the jump bit was that you were doing English, and you said that you went into a vocational. What was the trigger with that? Was there a mentor? Was there someone at school? Was there something?
Yeah, good question.
How did that open that door up? Because most people would have been like, well, how did you get the vocation? How did you go into that?
Yeah, I think very candidly, like going to university would have been incredibly expensive. My family didn't have much money, and, I got halfway through a year of A-levels and thought, what do I really want to do? And I liked tech, and I thought that, 4 years at university wasn't really what I wanted to do at that moment in time, nor really could my family afford it. So I thought, why kick the can down the road for another year doing A-levels when I could get a head start in business? So started working, like I said, sort of tech support type roles, like kind of cutting your teeth that way. In fact, support is like a really good way of getting into security, because you do learn how things fail, how things break, and how to fix them. So I don't regret it at all. I did go to university. Ultimately, I ended up going to Royal Holloway. I did a lot of that remotely and did my master's in cyber gosh, when did I do that? About 10 years ago now. Yeah.
Wow. So you could do it at any time. So I think that's the interesting thing with this. Of everyone I find fascinating about who are in a cyber role probably haven't gone some like obvious route or direction, because for most of us, not telling everyone's age, is that like you said, it didn't even exist. Like for me, when I was at school, it was Lemmings or how could I get on MSN Hotmail around the IT teacher without him noticing. That was my IT background. That was my tech. Didn't even think about cybersecurity. Don't think it came up. Where I have a daughter now that is 8, will be nearly 8, and that's what she does at school. Like, how do you safe on the web?
Yeah, definitely.
Can understand. So it's a different environment. So that's why I find it really fascinating. We're talking to people that are in the industry now, because none of us, everyone seems to have come from completely different background. It's been either the right timing, a mentor, someone said something, or if I'm being honest, men that I've interviewed, most of them they like breaking things and fixing them and what that looked like. So
you sound a little bit odd, don't you, saying breaking things? But no, understanding how things work. And I think the best way to decompose how something works, this will probably lead into other questions, but looking at misuse cases, looking at kind of the more kind of adversarial side of things, I think it helps with construction and building anyway. So yeah, cool.
But you are segueing beautifully in kind of my next question. Of securing environment. So obviously you had a fascination, you went into that, you identified that there was a protection side to tech support. So can you give in your opinion, what the current landscape is for cybersecurity?
Fundamentally, like if you take kind of like a sort of cyber risk equation, like this is going to be very philosophical now, apologies, but you've got actors who initiate events. Those events exploit vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities can cause business impact. Like I've now just ruined a book I wrote. That's basically 400 pages distilled into one sentence. But in a scenario like that,
after this, Chris, that's fine. Anyone wants to read it?
But no. Like nothing has changed really over the last kind of 25 years. Like that equation is still as valid today as it was back in the beginning, shall we say, of cyber. But what's happened today is I think there's just so much more like breadth and variance of different types of threats. Like you touched on, like your daughter being at school and like digital being so prevalent. Because of that, it's pervasive in all forms of life, right? So the threats that you're seeing, are targeting people's, like, I think a better way of phrasing it is like that blurring between sort of digital and physical it's significantly more blurred or opaque today than it was maybe 15 years ago. So I think security professionals have just really got an issue with visibility. Do you know what I mean? Like understanding and controlling like the environments that they look after. I've seen an enormous transition across kind of my career of, we used to protect, when I mentioned about being before the dark side of vendor world, everything was on-prem. Everything was in an environment that, broadly speaking, you controlled, and therefore you could kind of fortify that. And we built loads of firewalls, and we had IDS systems, and all of our sensitive data was in these really, really kind of like quote unquote secure enclaves. And being a CISO was quite easy. I'm sure people will now write in and say it's not true, but it really was. Now you have cloud, I'm sure we'll talk about AI, but there are so many different issues that the security organization has to kind of deal with today. And with digital being so pervasive, the end user requirements are very different. I remember working in financial services where, if you wanted email, you were given a BlackBerry. And that's just how it was, right? And you literally gave someone a physical device and you knew what it was, where it was, and what people were doing. The world's kind of changed, and I think legislation and regulation is part of that as well. I think people's supply chains, and you can fortify and to some degree control your environment, but understanding how the companies that you operate with, and you need to be aware of how they're doing, quote unquote, doing security. So that's a super long answer to a really simple question.
We're just so interconnected though, aren't we now?
Yeah, that's exactly.
You're saying that we've gone from being, we always joke about our castle, it's kind of the metaphor of what originally took, because our office is a castle, like you could put a moat around it, firewall it and do it in one place. And I always get asked this, why we're called Core to Cloud. And it was the CEO having a good night with a few beers and was like, yeah, but we're going to the core and we're moving to the cloud. And he was like, that's the name. And it was like, okay. But like that was his pre-production 10 years ago of like, this wasn't where we're going to stay. This is going to move and we're going to break. But everything's more connected. Like even from like a marketing perspective, I was fortunate, went to uni and did a good degree, but that's changed. Like even when I was there was no Instagram. Snapchat was just only arriving. It wasn't interconnected. I don't remember anyone having a conversation with me about GDPR or where the
Right.
data is being held or how's my CRM attached, connected. How can someone withdraw their data if they wanted
Yeah.
to? Like none of that ever came up.
No.
And I was at uni studying it. So I'm sure it is a module now. But
Yeah,
back,
I bet.
and I mean, it is 10 years or so since I've left, but that's a quick, that has
Yeah.
changed the industry. Where if you think of other industries, it hasn't evolved that fast, or
No,
that
I think,
speed, the lightning
yeah.
speed of change.
Completely. I mean, I could sit here now and talk about the specifics of ransomware attacks or tell you the latest volumetric DDoS and say, oh, these threats. But really, for me, as someone who runs security organizations, the biggest challenge is breadth. Like all we really want as security practitioners is some level of visibility and control. And if you have all these different factors and all these different environments, it makes it super difficult, definitely.
In your opinion, then, of saying the visibility piece, and that seems to be like where everyone wants to get to. And if someone's finding that a struggle right now, in your
Yeah.
opinion, where's like the good places to start? Or if you were in their position, what kind of places would you try to connect to try and give yourself that holistic view of your environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think get yourself out of the technology okay, I don't want to be misquoted on this. Get
No.
yourself out of the technology function is what I was going to say. This isn't a debate on where the CISO should report, but like understanding more about your business. And perhaps that's trite, like, and you've heard that like 100 times before, but like genuinely, if you understand like what the technology in your company is supposed to be doing, so aligning that to kind of business processes. I said to someone quite recently, like, the most powerful tool that a CISO has is like a Starbucks card, right? Like just go and meet different stakeholders across your business and learn how they're using technology, learn about their critical business processes. And from there, you'll almost get a natural decomposition because they say, oh yeah, we use this application here to order XYZ, or, oh yeah, we're processing expenses through 1, 2, 3. Learning about the business that way rather than a bottom-up approach is generally easier, and it's easier certainly to report to your executives and your board on cyber risk if you're doing that as well, because you have that kind of tie-in and whatnot.
Because we're so interconnected, because even here internally, we've been reviewing like our SaaS technologies and where the data is and etc. That, and we all had Microsoft and we all had Salesforce and everything that, and I was like, oh, what about my stuff? And everyone was like, what? And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I've got HubSpot, and they were like, oh yeah, and then I was like, oh well, we use Chat GPT to help us with content. Some of the teams might like use Trello or Monday or
Yeah.
all these other tools, and you could just see everyone being like, and it's like, well, my department used tech to make things move faster and quicker, and we have like lead gen things, like whether that's scorecard that takes data and goes in, and you could just see like our tech team were great and listened to me and took it all on board. But it wasn't until you had me in the room saying, well, these are the technologies we use, that they even considered them.
There you go. You've nailed it. Like, and what I said at the top of the session around things haven't changed in 25 years, like that's asset management, right? The fact it's cloud and SaaS applications is, somewhat irrelevant. It's the fact that you need that control, you need that visibility. So I'm glad we agree on that, Kelly. That's good.
No, I do. Well, I mean, the phase old joke used to be like, oh, it's just an IT problem. And I really don't believe it is. I mean, we do our Cyber Essentials Plus and ISO, and obviously I get part of that. I have to be questioned and asked, like, where do we get our pictures from? Do we have 2FA on our LinkedIn? Like, do we lock that all down? And going through that process has made me realize that I am very much a part of this. Like, we are a defense system to the company, and we all need to be part of that. And I think my marketing team are probably far more aware because they work in cybersecurity. But I don't know how if that is of their counterparts of other industries. I don't know. But yeah, we are an integral part of that.
I was just going to say, no, and that ties nicely into the point I raised on supply chain and like the old school on-prem side of things, because, those tools that you're talking about there, like Trello alternatives, for example, like they would have been in your data center. And if someone wanted to know which servers things were running on, they would just walk in with their key card and they'd go and know in a rack which boxes you were using. Whereas, as you mentioned, all of that data is now somewhere, right? So it shifts from being, a lot of the time, that visibility and that assurance shifts from being something that you can very technologically assert like, hey, I'll run a vuln scan or an asset management tool, to now more kind of process-based controls. So going and asking Trello, and I've picked on Trello here, other vendors are available, how you process data, like where is it, how do you notify us in the event of a breach? Like, they're not very technical, sexy things, but they're super important. So yeah.
And fundamental, aren't they?
Yeah, 100%.
Obviously, I mentioned some of the AI that's implementing in just the marketing world. We are also seeing that that's having a big impact in the technologies, the vendors we worked. We mentioned some of the vendors that you use. Obviously, I work with a lot of them. They come and tell me about how AI is doing this and it's machine learning, all this sort of stuff. What's kind of your take on the integration of AI and how that's helping us with securing our environments?
Well, it certainly is. That's my like one sentence. AI is helping
We're done.
security.
The podcast is finished.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just go and just use AI. No one needs to work in security anymore. Like, I think sometimes I've seen some solutions where, if all you have is an AI hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you just see that everything is kind of AI enabled without necessarily solving a business problem. It just looks cool. Do you know what I mean? I've seen you walk around RSA or Black Hat, and I saw a lot of that last year. I don't know if it's come at a good time or it's there, so that's why we're now seeing this. But unfortunately, with all the layoffs and things, like, AI is helping security organizations do more with less a lot of the time. Like, I've seen some really good implementations, certainly on the security operations side. So, historically, SecOps teams and certainly IR or incident response, it's just this deluge of tickets. And like, the issue with deluge of tickets is some human has to look at them, triage them, separate the wheat from the chaff, know what to then go and investigate, if you take a traditional life cycle. So if AI can do some of that work, I think that's awesome. Early on, like reducing the time from, for example, detection to triage. That's like a fairly solid use case for using AI. So again, another ops use case, but like synthesizing and summarizing things that are going on. So rather than an analyst having to go and pick 7 disparate pieces of information, correlating and then providing an AI summary, super cool. There's a garbage in, garbage out problem. Now, we could have an hour on different types of AI and the nuance between each of them. But like, from an LLM's perspective, there's certainly an issue with garbage in, garbage out. So how do you validate the information that's going into a large language model? And origin and data sovereignty is a huge concern of kind of mine, and I think the industry's more broadly, of like, how do you know where that information came from? Like, how can you assert the fidelity of it and stuff? So another super long answer, I'm afraid, but it's helping. But it's not, I've read, hey, in 5 years we won't need penetration testers, or IR will be performed by robots.
I mean, and I can only talk from my side on the marketing, and there's so many things that you can create video now, and probably there's enough podcasts of me now that I probably wouldn't need to host any, because you could use my voice to do it. But I think, like anything, I'm hoping it means it's just because of the speed of everything happening. For example, with digital content, I can just use marketing, for example. We're absorbing more and more and more of the time. And for a digital team, it's exhausting. Like, constant blogs, constant emails, changing of cadences, a new podcast idea, social media. That's a lot, and a lot to download. And I'm hoping that it's not actually going to dilute the number of jobs. We still need those human people, but it means that they can keep up with the volume of what people are digesting. The things that you mentioned about the AI and removing overload of notification fatigue. I've done podcasts with people that have had burnout and leaving the industry because they can't cope with it. Do you feel that AI, I know a lot of people are worried about it and they're going to lose their jobs. From what I can see from the marketing industry, I think it's adapting to change and seeing how you can use it to empower you. I mean, I know that's a different topic completely, but
still, I agree completely. Like, I think if your job can be exclusively replaced by AI, then it probably wasn't a well-defined job. I'm talking cyber specifically, right? So again, I'm not going to labour my SecOps point, but you wouldn't lose an analyst in that scenario. The analyst would move from doing the very mundane, repeatable, very boring, like early stage triage. It would free them up to go and actually investigate for like vulnerabilities and action and recover and, educate the business and reduce future events from happening, because now they've got more time to do other things. So I think it's going to enrich like the security, not just analysts, but architects, CISOs, testers. It will certainly help, but I can't see it like exclusively replacing jobs. I don't think so. I hope not.
No,
Yeah.
I've literally just done a podcast before, an interesting with a really interesting guy called Jamie, and he was paralyzed after getting shingles, and also he's got neurodiversity. But he was saying how AI has allowed him to build 3 businesses, has allowed him to climb mountains, like all these like tech and tools have allowed him to be part of the world. And he just sees it as an incredible empowering thing that someone that may be incredibly dyslexic now can articulate something and put a pitch together or put a business idea together. It's just because they've not been able to put it in a language that maybe all of us talk.
Yeah, completely. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I thought, so I'm on the, AI I think is going to change us. Like it's going to make everything faster and quicker, and we probably need to look behind us, but could be incredibly empowering.
Definitely.
With building security products though, what do you think there's some considerations that people need to put into place when developing them, making sure that they're secure, like a balance between innovation?
Yeah.
You talked about AI. I mean, I'm a marketeer. We like to use strap lines and make things sound shiny. We all know that some products there's a level of superiority of AI. And some people, to me, I've done podcasts and say, don't call it AI, it's machine learning. Kind of where are you on that spectrum, and where do you think security products and AI lie?
They have to solve a problem, don't they? Like I mentioned the metaphor earlier of hammer and nails, and I don't always see that. Do you know what I mean? There's almost like, I'm going to alienate myself from the CISO community here, but there's almost like an emperor's new clothes sometimes of certain tools that you have. Like everyone's got this tool, so we have this tool. Oh, hey, we have a new UABA solution, or this is what my malware sandbox is doing with threat intel from blah, blah, blah. Like, are you actually like materially reducing risk in your environment? Like, how are you prioritizing each of those tools? So like, I'm fortunate, I think fortunate's the word, to run kind of product and security at Cyberhaven, because we've kind of identified that we should really be our customer zero or patient zero of our own product, right? So our security team can inform product of what's working well, what isn't, what do we want to change, like feature requests and whatnot. So I think that's super important to have solutions that are actually solving problems. And you mentioned marketing. Super important for marketing to be able to communicate the value of something. Security is so arcane and esoteric at times that, like polymorphic malware detection through a sandbox, like why, like the why, that's, so I think that's really important. And also get out there and talk to your customers as well. Like when you're building products, I think it's super important to know what gaps they have, what pain points. You can almost get in an echo chamber at times, just naturally, like, I'm not criticizing anyone, where a company thinks something is a wonderful idea and there's 20, 30 people working on it. When you actually, by the time you go and, have some kind of MVP to go and talk to customers with, kind of like, well, yeah, great, but we don't really need that. Or, that's not a priority for us, or regulations changing and this is now more important for us. So I think that's really important. I don't think the innovation and the actual security side of things should be mutually exclusive. Like I think if you get your security controls right in your environment, this is just like, again, another podcast in itself, I think, but like getting security controls that are understood by people outside of security, it's all well and good. If I go back to my financial services days, we used to write 40-page, 50-page security designs that we expected other people outside of security to care about. And, naturally they didn't, but we were dogmatic and we said, no, we're going to do this. I think now having something, people's attention spans have shortened. You mentioned social media and being online and expectations there. So you need to get those controls and that education and awareness to all areas of your business in a do you know what I mean? In like a consumable way. So they can do that.
I mean, going back to when I started at Course Card, I had a small background in tech. I'd worked for like Fujitsu and Software One and stuff like that, but predominantly all my marketing background had actually been hospitality and film. So I didn't come from the industry. And I went to InfoSec, and I remember walking around and I was with James. He's like, you're very quiet. And I was like, do they all do the same thing? And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't know what they do. And he was like, well, obviously that's a da da da. And I was like, obviously, because their tagline is exactly the same as their tagline. The difference is they're purple or they're green. And I thought everyone had to be blue. I actually thought branding had to be blue. When I started, I was like, does everyone have to be blue? Is that like a code? And he was like, why do you say that? Because I was like, everyone's blue. And he was like, well, it's secure and it's proper. And I was like, okay. And I just remember giving white papers to push out to people. And I would go, and I do it now, even with our tech team. I was like, can someone tell me in layman terms what this is trying to say? And they'll go,
Yeah.
oh, well, what they're trying to explain is that they've got visibility of their IoT or something like that. And I'm like, why
Yeah,
haven't you said
precisely.
that? Why
Well,
haven't you said that?
yeah. Think about things now. I mentioned, unfortunately, sort of layoffs and things earlier. Like pretty much every industry and every organization, however big, however small, are cutting back, quote unquote, in tech. You know, they're having to, I don't know, slice 12% off their like spend for a year, for example. If you're in a scenario like that, imagine going to a CFO and having to explain why you need an EDR tool, or talking through, you know, what a SIM does, for example, or why you need a CNAP solution for your cloud native technology. Like we have spent so much time talking in that very, like I said earlier, arcane language, that a lot of CISOs out there, they really, really struggle to communicate the why. The what, oh, we love the what. We can talk on LinkedIn for days on end about the what, but the why of those solutions is often lost. So
What we developed as one of our services is crisis simulation. So we'll pick a famous attack and you'll sit through it, but you'll make a decision as a business. And we can do it for a tech team, so the tech team can do it, but we can do it for the C-suite. And we actually did it with one of our big customers yesterday. And the C-suite like walked out and was like, there was lawyers there was marketing, there was PR, there was HR, and they were all going through a famous crisis that we've all seen in the news, and they all had to make decisions. And they saw the benchmark of customer loyalty, their shares drop, their employee, and they could just see it by the decisions that they made, and they could understand. And then we got feedback from the CISO like, oh, I've asked for this product. They completely agree, and they've signed off the budget. And it's like, because they could understand. It was like the worst case tabloid scenario, and the easiest thing is to, if we put this solution in, it would have protected us. And something like you have to articulate it.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier around business impact. You're now making like you're manipulating in a good way. Can manipulation ever be a good thing? But you're putting security in their language. They're understanding the business ramifications of like a major incident. Because okay, the CISO is going to get some heat, of course, but you know, invariably it's the CEO who's going to have to go, depending on the size of the organization, who's going to have to go and talk to the media, who's going to have to speak to regulators, depending on the status of the company, potentially has to file a breach report. Yeah, exactly. So it's hearts and minds, isn't it? And I think, you know, if you want someone to patch Chrome and update things, like get them to understand what can happen. You know, what is that like tip of the iceberg? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it is hard to see. I mean, I always say we all will do fire safety in an office, or put people on health and safety, and we can all kind of understand that, or we can all understand why we lock our cards or lock our front doors. And I think because this is such a new, I know it's not new, but it is still quite a new thing for people.
It is, yeah.
Sometimes you have to put them in the scenario to be able to see how to get through it.
Yeah. It needs to be scenario oriented, and it needs to be like frequent as well. Like this annual, and I don't want to get on a soapbox again, but you know, measuring awareness of cyber like exclusively with phishing simulations once a year for your ISO is a pretty crap way of like measuring you know the culture of security in your company. I think it's a useful tool, but it should be one of many. You know, education should be largely contextualized to like the business unit as well. For the same reason, for hearts and minds, you know, it's very visceral, isn't it? Like the impact potentially of a breach, but not if you just talk in these, you know, very technical terms.
No. The next kind of area that I had for us to talk about is kind of this cloud security side of things and the engineering of that. Why do you think you've talked about it, we've gone from on-prem, we're going onto cloud. Why do you think that's gone so quickly? And do you see more challenges? And do you think there's going to be more strategies? Do you think visibility is still the crux of all of it when it comes to the cloud as well?
I would say visibility more so in the cloud. And again, like we need to, I'm going to try and avoid acronyms today, Kelly. But like if we think about kind of SaaS, we talked a lot about like applications shifting from like data center to cloud for like, you know, internal or corporate IT use. But the cloud, certainly when it comes to visibility, when you think about kind of cloud native technologies for running infrastructure, visibility becomes, I think, even more important there. So again, same kind of transition. We used to build things in data centers and now we build them in the cloud. But I think when you think, oh God, I'm going to say paradigms, but when you think about like the paradigm of how you physically build something, like infrastructure used to be what we would call N-tier architecture. So you'd have like a presentation layer, this is so boring, but sorry, you'd have a presentation layer, an application layer, and a database layer. And again, they were like distinct components. They were largely like servers.
Yeah.
But these days, for reasons of cost, for reasons of speed to market, for various other reasons, like things are built in these much smaller, like microservices way. And that's a different way of securing things. You've gone from maybe having 3 components or 6 components if you were going to have redundancy or high availability, to now like your average, this will make some sense, I promise. Like your average application now is like, I don't know, it could be 50, 100, 200, 500 microservices, all running in like Google or Amazon's data centers. And like how it's built is very different. It's a different skill set. It's much more developer led. I'm sure you've talked a lot on this podcast around kind of DevOps and DevSecOps and whatnot. But the reason for that kind of change in the way we do things is, it's a very different landscape, so visibility becomes even more of a challenge, and the skills you need to protect those environments have changed. So yeah, I do think you asked initially actually around kind of drivers. Drivers are like invariably time to market. In an agile world, everyone's trying to quote unquote fail fast and whatnot, and innovation and first mover advantage is so important. That's super difficult to do if it takes 6 months to get a change request to build a server in a data center. If someone can go and get a credit card, spin something up in 5 minutes, then they're going to do it, aren't they? So
yeah, everyone wants it much faster, much quicker. So in your opinion, what would be your kind of go-to when trying to effectively manage and monitor the cloud? What would be some kind of foundational things that you'd want to put in place?
I don't want to keep saying visibility, but standardizing things, I think certainly, like, if companies are going to go out there and, you have to foster innovation, you have to give these like development and labs teams environments to crash and burn, to sandbox, to test things, but make sure that you have like a standard service offering in your company, I think is a good idea. So don't say no, hey, can we use Azure to spin up some new AI LLMs that we're building? Just saying no, you're just going to disenfranchise people. They're going to go and do things as like a shadow IT initiative. Give people the tools they need to do their job, but do it in a way that you can put the guardrails that you want for kind of your security team's needs. And then just make sure that you have commensurate tooling. If you used to have like, if there was a requirement for firewalls and IDS and like EDR components on-prem, what do you need for those cloud environments? Like, is it the same? Are the risks the same? Make sure lots of buzzwords, I apologize, but like make sure you're kind of threat modeling those environments. Make sure you understand how, the landscape's different in a cloud environment to potentially something in that perimeter you previously controlled. And be flexible. Like I mentioned, slightly tongue-in-cheek, possibly not so tongue-in-cheek, those 40-page design documents, but make sure that you're evolving. Like if your engineering teams are out there writing their documentation in Notion with all of their code in GitHub, it's probably a really good idea to make sure that your security documentation and your security code is in the same locations. Otherwise you're just people are busy, fewer people doing things, and make security easy.
And it's right, like you're saying, the world is moving very fast. We all want to do things quicker. You don't want to stop innovation. You want to stop teams working. I mean, a lot of people talk about like putting security at the beginning of design, like it's part of the design process. It's part of every decision that you make. But it's getting that balance of how do you allow people to do their jobs very well and fast and not stop that the security is thought about forever.
Definitely.
And that's hard. It's not an
easy. It is. I think also though, we love a truism, don't we? We love these things we can stand on stage and say, like everyone talks about shifting security left for a cloud environment. And I don't want to, I'm sure you've had someone come on and say that. Like you totally need to shift security left for the reason that you outlined, for getting, requirements nice and early before anyone shipped anything, before anyone's written a line of code, for everyone to be on the same page of like table stakes principles for security. Where shift security left fails is whatever they're planning on doing in 2024 definitely won't be what they ship. Like, the whole mantra and methodology and way of doing like software development is that you're agile, generally speaking, is that you prototype stuff, is that you listen to customer feedback. So you need to have a mechanism for that security team, not just to be involved early, but frequently. And I think that people mistake that. We have people pontificate over, we've moved all of our requirements as far left as you possibly can. But then no one sees security for 6 months after that, and the finished solution looks very different to what was initially ideated on.
Do you remember the paperclip when you had Word?
Yeah,
and
Clippy.
Yeah, and you don't do something, and he'd wave and be like, "Did you really mean to do that?" Like,
Yeah.
And like, it would be, I don't know if this will ever happen, or maybe this is where AI would go, but like if you are coding and you are doing something, you have like that little version that goes, hang on, do you know that if you do this, this is implemented on security, you should probably speak to the security team. So it allows someone to work, but kind of triggers them.
That legit exists today. Like having like those tools within IDE environments. The problem is always false positives, right? The problem is, and devs especially, I don't know, they're a special bunch. They're an interesting bunch, I should probably say. So as soon as things either A, slow them down, or, present false positives, you generally find people look to bypass tools. AI has certainly improved tools that we have for static analysis, which is like largely what you're talking about here. So there we go.
There you are. Who knew? There's a Clippy version of AI.
In fact, I don't think anyone's actually taken it to market as like code-based Clippy. So you might be onto something there. You could go and do that.
Up. Trademark it now.
That's it. Go and raise some VC money to build that, I think. Yeah.
So we've kind of touched on this, and the cybersecurity, and I think we both agree on this, isn't just an IT problem now, it's a department problem. And also people need to be able to make sure that the board understands and there's communication and buy-in. Like you've said, people are getting tighter budgets, having to review legacy technology. You can't just buy anything now. What we've kind of touched on this, but how do you think cybersecurity professionals now can effectively communicate? And maybe that's even using ChatGPT to explain this. This is why can you translate it so a would understand?
No, it's a good question. I think the current model is probably broken, like in all seriousness. I'm sure people will say, oh, it isn't in my company. But what I've experienced and what kind of friends and peers have told me they experience is security still goes to the leadership team a little bit like a naughty child. Like, do you know what I mean? Like you're kind of summoned periodically to talk to leadership. I'm thinking, what could I say here? To like a leadership team or like an audit committee, for example. And it does feel like unidirectional. Do you know what I mean? You're going and, you're giving this information and you're kind of there with a sense of trepidation going like, shit, is this the right data? Do you care about these things? And you then get this kind of real challenge of there isn't the education at the leadership level. So people don't want to ask what are perceived to be dumb questions. So I should definitely write a blog on this. Like then they don't ask questions back. So the CISO leaves thinking, well, I don't know if I did a good or a bad job, but I haven't had any feedback. So I'll come back next time and I'll basically present the same stuff and just an update on it. So then no one's asking problems relating to like business risks. We're generally presenting a lot of metrics that potentially the board or the leadership team don't really care about. And, it's this horrible self-fulfilling prophecy of like just no one getting more educated about cyber and business risks. So I don't know. We touched on it at the top of the session, but if you can get your leadership team like interested in the ramifications, to your point on your crisis exercise, like if they understand the like, oh crap moments and how technology is so intrinsic and like inherently in all of those, like I think that's the sort of stuff to present. So I've had some success with more of like an OKRs approach. So like go in and present, hey, look, these are the security team's objectives for the year. So like FY25, we'd be like, hey, this is what we're going to do. So that's the what, and then sort of decompose that into a series of whys. So like a series of key results to say, these are the things that we want to do. Now those key results will like change month on month or quarter on quarter, but painting much more of a story and saying, we're doing these things, these key results, because if we don't, that thing we had in that crisis exercise, that could happen. And this is why they're force ranked in the order that they are. And if you go in with that approach, I've seen a lot of value and traction in getting security embedded into business processes.
I think it's also becoming a bit more mainstream as well. So I was watching, I don't know if you watched the TV program, it's called This Morning, and it's got Jennifer Anderson and Reese Witherspoon in it. And the last 3 episodes they had a major cyber attack. And they got everything, got all their emails, everything. And the board decided because they were Russian, they weren't going to pay the ransomware and it was going to be released. And out of that has been absolute carnage because they've released emails of board members being racists about their employees. They released what everyone was getting paid. They identified that race and gender had an impact of people getting paid and promotions. It's just pure carnage.
Yeah.
They got personal phones, so intimate moments. They've released that, and you could see the turmoil of these people in there, like, oh my god, all my most detailed things are online. And it was a decision that the board made, going, this is what we're doing, doesn't matter. And now the repercussions, and at the time, so it's just, I feel like it's getting more mainstream and more things can be seen, and there are more examples of stuff that you could tap into, because I think also, I don't know about you in your career, now things come on TV, or my dad will text me and go, this happened on this program, and that's what you do, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. Or like, well, my husband's watching this morning, I was like, oh, now I kind of get it, why it would be such a massive issue if someone hacked. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what it's all about. But I think it's someone being able to understand. And
you're definitely right. I think impact has become much easier because it's always been the challenge, right? How do you prove a security negative? So, hey, we need $1 million to invest in this solution. You don't have a breach, or you don't know of a breach for 12 months. Do you renew that solution? Has it been? And these are the conversations I would have with a CFO, and they're super difficult conversations, because you're like, well, if your TV program example is completely unpalatable to that leadership team, the fact that there's a 10% chance or a 20% chance, other than in prioritization of controls, like, it's still unpalatable to you. So you need that solution, So I think, having these like front page news stories, mainstream media reporting on cyber incidents and, election manipulation and, companies going out of business. And, you look at the United Health Group and their I said I wasn't going to talk about ransomware, but like their ransomware incident of like literally having very physical, visceral, real impacts. I think it helps. It's awful, but it helps what we do.
It makes it more tangible, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Human beings need to be able to otherwise it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we all insure our cars, we all insure our houses, and probably, we touch wood, none of us ever have to use it. But it's there because we have seen someone have a flood, or
absolutely.
So because we've seen examples. I think because cybersecurity is so new. Also, I don't know, I feel like people are being more open about it. I feel when I started, if someone had been attacked, it was very hush-hush. No one wanted to talk about it. Where I feel like the industry people are being more open because they want other people to learn from their mistakes, or the third-party supply chain thing. Aren't you, like, you just because you get hacked doesn't mean you don't have this wider impacts on other people. So I just think, I don't know, do you feel that people talk more? Like, I feel like there's more podcasts. I think people more. I don't think I could have got people talking about it 5-6 years ago on a podcast.
I think that's fair. I think you're right. I think and I'm going to talk in industry platitudes and truisms again, but the whole kind of, it's not if, it's when you'll be breached. Like, everyone said that 10 years ago. They didn't mean it though. Like, do you know what I mean? The societal acceptance of that, I don't think was there. CISOs would say it and feel very good about themselves, but like, I don't think anyone actually believed it. Whereas now there's just this litany, this conveyor belt of breaches. So everyone, and we are getting more transparency. Like, I'm not going to bore everyone with like regulation and legislation today, but changes around like mandatory disclosures like are helping. I think the recent SEC rules on that of saying you've got 4 days, and GDPR's had that for a while, but doing it with listed companies in the US, I think there's really been some rather nasty, like very kind of front page news on that recently. And I think that transparency has then made everyone feel like they can speak out. Like with many things, it just takes that groundswell of just everyone out there getting involved and communicating. So you're absolutely right.
More accountability.
More accountability.
Looking ahead, then, as it continues to evolve, what do you envision cybercrime and the future? Whether you're working for a vendor or whatever you decide, your next book or whatever, where do you see the future going, and where do you think that's going to lead us all?
Oh, wow. I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I think we'll probably close on what I started on, is just, you're just going to see, I don't want to say sophisticated. Everyone says, attacks are going to get more sophisticated. I'm not sure it's necessarily that they need to get more sophisticated. They're just going to get more heavily involved and just tightly into people's lives, to be perfectly honest. I mean, look at how things have gone. We're talking about like the expansion and like explosion of AI, like blockchain, like everyone's lives are online. I just think that people need to stay on top of it. Security teams need to stay on top of it. Organizations need to be aware that these aren't just things that happen in the server rooms. Like cybersecurity is a business challenge, and you'll see continued regulatory tightening. I think I mentioned supply chains at the top of the call, but it's great to get your house in order, but really understanding and validating the organizations that you're involved with, like the process your data, I think super important. Just continue to educate your business, really, and just get people involved.
And we all have a digital imprint, like now, even more so. Like the next generation is going to be even more online or connected.
Completely.
I mean, IoT, even that in our own houses, is madness.
Yeah.
Think about it, all the things like, we've got robot vacuums now and all sorts, like
completely.
How it's.
But that's a really good example. They're all the same thing though, right? Because I thought, but when you asked me that question, off the top of my head, I thought I could get very like detailed and nuanced around like the sophistication of adversaries or nation states, and I don't really think for the average person that helps anyone. It creates a sense almost of apathy. Like if you think that like a Russian or Chinese, other nation states again are available, but like if you think that they can compromise everything and access your webcam and they can do all these weird and wonderful things, like why bother? Like, do you know what I mean? If you're someone's mum sat at home, so I think you've got to be significantly more pragmatic and just talk about the basics. Just make things more difficult for people, raise the bar, update your operating systems, patch your applications, have multi-factor authentication on everything, and even those basics would be good for a lot of companies to be applying, to be honest.
But it even goes back, I mean, for me, when you talk about global warming, when it becomes so big, it's kind of like, well, there's nothing I can do. Like we're done for. Whereas actually when you talk to someone and they say, well, actually just these more changes, if you could do this, this, and this in your household, you would cut your carbon footprint by down. And if everyone could do that, it would make this impact. That feels manageable. That feels controllable. Like I can control my house and my environment. I can put some things in place. I can make sure this isn't connecting to X. I can make sure my daughter has only a certain amount of whatever time on the internet and training. That feels controllable. When you talk about nation states and bigger and they're hacking everything, that feels paralyzing, if I'm being honest. So I think if you can take it into bite-sized pieces and what you can control and what impact you can have, and even if you're not in cybersecurity, it's just putting 2FA on something or making sure that you're not using your work email for your shopping or whatever, just doing small hygiene things could have a really big impact on everyone.
I agree completely.
Chris, I could talk to you for many more hours, but
thank you.
Have a day job. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I really hope that our paths will cross again. Are you doing CySec in Bristol?
I am. Yeah, I'm involved in the actual steering group on what we do. So you've reminded me I need to do something. So yes, I'll be in Bristol. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, we will be seeing you in Bristol. Hopefully
Lovely.
Our paths will cross soon. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. What another great episode. I could just talk and talk at the moment, just what's going on, but 60 minutes of brilliantness of talking to you. Thank you so much. You covered so many areas. It was quite difficult to stay on topic. I don't know what the audience is thinking, but there's just so much that we can learn from Chris. If you don't follow him or you're not connected with him or you've not seen him talk or read his book, I encourage you to do so. And I really hope that this isn't the last time we have him on the podcast. There's just so much that we can cover. It was insightful. There was expertise on a critical topic. We're still talking about AI because it's so important. But please make sure you tune into the next episode. Loads of discussions. And as always, your feedback is so important to us to make sure that we've got the right guests on here for you and giving you all the insights that you need for your cybersecurity journey. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to speaking to you soon.